Hey there, Twins fans. What is going on? Welcome to another brand new edition of Twins Daily's Offseason Live. My name is Nick Nelson, as you can see here on the screen. And today we are going to be talking about the Twins bullpen. The date is Thursday, February 11th, 2021. We are just over a week from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training, so let's try to figure out what the makeup of this Twins bullpen is going to be. Let's take a look at some of the moves they've made, who we think is going to make the cut, and what we think the hierarchy might be in that bullpen. A pretty key unit for the Twins last year, and a unit that probably is going to see a lot of turnover. It doesn't look like they're going to be bringing back some key pitchers from last year's picture, and they brought in some wild cards and some interesting free agents. So without further ado, let me bring in our two guests here for tonight. David Youngs of TwinsDaily.com and John Bonus, the Twins Geek, also of TwinsDaily.com. David, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Nick. I tell you what, it's a Thursday evening. Clear skies, maybe negative 10 degrees out, but baseball is on the horizon.
It's cold out, but it's warm in here, and we've got some cold beers. At least I know I do. David, you got yourself a drink there?
Sure do. In my limited edition Winter Meltdown 2021 Twins Daily pint glass.
Yes. Hey, I myself am drinking a beer in this limited edition Winter Meltdown 2021 pint glass, and there we can see Mr. Bonus also enjoying himself. John, what are you drinking, and how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Let's see. I've got the Black Stack Double Dry Hopped Sponge Bath IPA, and it's great. Actually, I got a several 4-packs just a couple weeks ago, so I'm going to make my way through those this February.
Awesome. That is what I like to hear. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking here today about the Twins bullpen. We're going to try to sort it out. Since we last convened here on Offseason Live, I think it was last Wednesday night, David joined us, as well as Matthew Taylor, another great Twins Daily writer. And we talked a little bit about the signings of Nelson Cruz and Alex Colome, who will, of course, be part of this discussion. Since then, the Twins have made another couple pickups in the bullpen, a waiver claim and a trade. So we're going to talk a little bit about these new additions, and then we're going to go over how it might all come together. As I mentioned, spring training is fast upon us, and I personally think the Twins are pretty much done making moves in the bullpen. We can talk about that a little, and I'll explain why I think that. But just want to let everyone know, if you're watching via YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you're at, your comments, we can see them. They come into a little feed. We can pull them up onto the screen, and we'd love to hear what you guys think and let you kind of help guide the conversation. I see Seth is here. He says, hi, everybody. I see Colton says, good evening. Go Twins. Thank you, Colton. Thanks for joining us. Seth says, 10 below sounds wonderful. Yes, up in Perham, I believe it's like 30 below. Seth is very cheery about just absurd frigid temperatures. All right, so to kind of kick this conversation off a little bit, I want to take a look at the Twins roster as it currently stands as a little bit of a starting point. So I've pulled it up on screen. This is kind of a projection of how the 2021 roster is shaping up so far. And what we're really going to be zeroing in on here is that lower right quadrant with the bullpen. So you can see we're predicting it's going to be an 8-man bullpen. I think that is a pretty safe bet. That would be a 13-man pitching staff, which on the 26-man roster makes a lot of sense. And we've got the guys, 6 names there that I think are pretty safely penciled in to that unit, and you can see the 2 open spots. So we're going to talk about who might fill those last 2 spots based on the mix. They've got a lot of names, as we'll learn, that are in the running for those roles, and then we'll try to just kind of figure out, what's the hierarchy going to be? Who are going to be Rocco Baldelli's go-to guys in the 8th and 9th inning? Who might be those middle relievers? And what are some of the other roles and functions that players might fit in this bullpen? So I guess just to kind of start off the conversation, David, as you look at the roster here, do you feel like, because the 40-man roster is full, in fact, they're going to have to let someone else go. One of the players that was in the mix for one of these bullpen spots who the Twins brought in on waivers earlier in the offseason, Brandon Waddell, was designated for assignment today to make room for a new outfielder that they claimed off waivers by the name of Kyle Garlick, a right-handed swinging outfielder who will give them a little bit of depth. I think, little corner outfield depth. They've lost some of that with Eddie Rosario leaving, obviously, with Marwin Gonzalez leaving, who filled in a lot of innings for that. But still plenty of names in this bullpen mix. So David, with the 40-man roster being full and with sort of the names that we're going to look at in this bullpen mix, do you think the Twins are done, maybe a non-roster guy or something like that, but for the most part, they've got the guys that they're going to bring into camp?
I do, Nick. Yeah, I think that, unless there's another, potential minor league deal signed, I think that the Minnesota Twins are pretty much done, capping that off with the move to get Garlick today and bringing or optioning Brandon Waddell down to the minor leagues. I don't know if that will stay or not. Waddell is a lefty, and the Twins, in addition to him, Lewis Thorpe, Taylor Rogers, and Caleb Thielbar are the only lefties on the relief staff. So wouldn't be shocked if he does get some playing time this year, but I like the addition of Garlick. Obviously not a ton of major league time, but has been a power hitter in the minor leagues. But we aren't going to see any more major moves by any means.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. John, do you agree with that line of thought? Do you think they're basically done in the bullpen and they're going to kind of sort through what they've got here?
No, I'm not convinced about that. I don't think we're going to see a major move, but I think it's potentially the last two spots on those. One of those spots could still be filled with somebody from the free agent class. I'd probably put it at 25%. I'd say most likely that they will not be making another move. But this management team has not been afraid to stretch a little bit on payroll if they see a really good deal out there. I think there are enough intriguing options out there still in the free agent market, including some old names that they might feel very comfortable with. Like I don't think Tyler Clippard has signed with anybody yet, and he's one of those guys that I thought back in November he was a perfect fit for this roster. I'm not convinced he's not still a perfect fit for this roster. So, it might be that they want to instead, dedicate their resources to sorting through some of the other arms they have in spring training. But it could also be that they say, no, let's get one more veteran in here, and we'll let those guys who are in spring training, work through what they have to work through. Maybe send them back down to the minor leagues again down to AAA over to St. Paul for a little while. They'll just be a phone call away. So, yeah, I don't think it'll be a huge signing, but I could see them still bringing in somebody that we recognize with some major league experience.
Still a lot of names out there, that is for sure, and it is going to be. It hasn't been maybe the buyer's market that we necessarily thought it would be as far as relief pitching and free agency, but I think it's pretty clearly going to be a buyer's market here as we get down to the nitty-gritty of the offseason and spring training gets going. These guys just need to get jobs. They need to get to camp and start showing their stuff and start winning jobs. A lot of these guys maybe hoped they would have a major league deal and a guaranteed spot in a bullpen, and maybe they're not going to. And, the Twins with their ability to evaluate, they could be in a good position here. So Jason says, got my Twins hoodie and hat on at Bowling League. Bring on some baseball. Thanks for joining us, Jason. We're almost there. 10 days away, as I mentioned, from spring training starting.
Better not be using the bumpers.
Oh, I don't think so. In a league? Oh, boy. Levi says, shouldn't Stashak be a no-doubt seventh guy in the bullpen? That is a very good point and a worthy one. We'll talk a little bit about why I don't know that that's exactly a lock. But let's talk just briefly about the two new guys that the Twins have brought in within the past week here. Last Thursday, made a trade, sent outfielder Lamont Wade Jr. to the San Francisco Giants in exchange for right-handed pitcher Sean Anderson. He's a 26-year-old. He's thrown 111 innings in the majors. Not a lot of success so far, a 5.17 ERA, although he did have a mid-3 ERA last year in the short season with San Francisco. He's got a 94-mile-per-hour fastball with elite spin rates, very high end of the chart in StatCast, which is kind of intriguing. Also an 88-mile-per-hour slider. You know how the Twins like their slider guys. Couple interesting things here. First of all, the Twins making a trade to acquire a relief pitcher for an outfielder from San Francisco. We saw that happen at the trade deadline in 2019. It didn't go very well. They traded Jalen Davis to the Giants for Sam Dyson, who turned out to be a bad acquisition and quite possibly a bad person. But obviously no bridges burnt there because the Twins and Giants are still able to pull off a move. John, any thoughts on this move? What do you think about Sean Anderson and the decision to flip Lamont Wade, who I think we all agree is a nice player, a very solid piece, but maybe a redundant, expendable piece on this Twins roster?
The Lamont Wade move looks especially interesting after today's roster move too, right? I think that you could argue they took a look at their 40-man roster, and they had what they have always had, what they've had since Derek and Thad took over. They had a lot of left-handed hitting outfielders, and Lamont Wade was somebody that they could get rid of and maybe swap out with a right-handed option to help provide a little bit more balance in terms of some of the options that they might want in the corner outfields. They managed to do exactly that. I wouldn't be totally shocked if they made that move with an eye towards maybe picking up Garlick. And then they got Sean Anderson. Sean Anderson is valuable for a couple of reasons. First of all, he fits the Wes Johnson profile, right? He's got a big slider. He's got a good fastball. And then also, more importantly, he's got options. So you can send him down he's got 2 years of options. So you can send him down to St. Paul and keep him down, stash him in St. Paul, and he can work on those things. And when he, is at the point where he's super effective, then they can call him up. So, I think it's a nifty little bit of roster management more than anything. Essentially what they did is they swapped Anderson or Waddell for Anderson and Wade for Garlick.
Yeah, that's a good point about the Garlick for Wade swap, because they are in some ways very opposite types of players. I mean, they're both corner outfielders. Lamont Wade could play some center. I don't think that Garlick can. I don't think he has in the minors. One is right-handed, one is left-handed. Wade, obviously a very patient, disciplined hitter without much power, and Garlick sort of on the opposite end of that spectrum. Not a very disciplined hitter, a little strikeout prone, but he's got some power. I think he hit 23 home runs in AAA in 81 games in 2019. So kind of interesting, especially if you can be sort of that lefty masher to complement some of the left-handed starters in the Twins outfield. David, any thoughts on this trade? Any thoughts on Sean Anderson specifically as an addition for the Twins?
Yeah, well, I think that, agreeing with John, he fits the Twins profile. Good slider. He's got some velocity on him. And similar to the other acquisition that they received in Ian Hamilton, he's fairly young. Now, I'm sure we'll talk about Hamilton in a bit, but Sean Anderson has been pretty similar when it comes to righty versus lefty batters. I believe that against both those sides of the plate, hitters batted 267 or 276 and 277. And obviously, he's someone that, like John mentioned, there's options. So he, absolutely will have time to work on his craft down in St. Paul. Not necessarily someone that I think will be on the 40-man roster right away. But nonetheless, I think it's a solid trade in the sense that Garlick has some potential at the plate, and it doesn't hurt to have another young bullpen arm.
Definitely. I love how David shows up with like actual stats and has done some level of research, whereas I like create a couple slides and just wing it. But
Baseball Reference is my Facebook.
It's Baseball Reference rocks. The slider is interesting, and that's a pitch that, if you look at the numbers on a limited sample last year, he shut opposing hitters down with that huge whiff rate. But I think what differentiates him a little bit from Whistler, who is, of course, the obvious comparison, and kind of funny because the Giants picked up Matt Whistler when the Twins let him go, and probably part of the reason they were willing to part with Sean Anderson. The slider is good, and there's definitely something to exploit there. But I think that fastball has some potential. I mean, like I mentioned, he throws in the mid-90s with spin rate that is off the charts. That might be leading to some problems controlling that fastball, which I think is going to be his biggest challenge. He had a 7.0 walks per nine rate last year, which is not good. And I wrote an article on Twins Daily the other day recounting a story from last August when the Giants had a series against the Angels. And Sean Anderson had some drama with the Angels and the best player in baseball, Mike Trout. He appeared twice in 3 days against the Angels, faced Trout in both of those appearances, and he had 3 pitches that sailed near Mike Trout's head, 95 miles an hour. And it was not intentional, clearly. I mean, there's no reason that Sean Anderson, a rookie pitcher, is going to be throwing at the best player in baseball's head. But Joe Madden, the manager of the Angels, was not pleased. And he more or less came out, said after the game, this guy has enough accuracy. He can't command his fastball enough that he shouldn't be in the majors. It's irresponsible. No, he was mad. He was mad. I mean, this is his top player, but not a very strong review. And I think that sort of lays out the challenge ahead of the Twins as they try to get that fastball reined in. But if they can, I mean, a mid-90s fastball and a high-90s slider is a pretty nasty repertoire. So as we look at the next player from the Anderson and Hamilton signings, or as I like to say, Anderson and Hamilton. Their names are Anderson and Hamilton. Okay, anyways. Yes, another guy who has a pretty hard fastball and a hard slider in the upper 90s. The day after the Twins traded for Sean Anderson, they claimed Ian Hamilton, a right-handed pitcher, off waivers from the Philadelphia Phillies. Much less time in the majors for Hamilton. He's only thrown 12 innings with a 4.50 ERA, but he's got a fastball that checks in at 96, slider that checks in at 89. He's changed hands quite a few times of late. He's been designated for assignment and claimed off waivers 3 times now in the last 6 months, with the Twins being the most recent, getting him from Philadelphia. Came up with the White Sox, has kind of an interesting backstory. He was considered a really good relief prospect, putting up very good numbers in the minors, and just had a heck of a deal he went through with his health in like 2019. He was in a minor car accident that messed up his shoulder. So that was an issue. And then during that season, he got hit in the face with a line drive and really got messed up. I mean, broke his jaw, knocked out teeth. He had to have multiple surgeries. And I think that's something that's kind of, he's better. They got it fixed, but there's certainly a mental aspect to going through something like that and trying to pitch. So the talent is there. Can the Twins help him get past that scary incident and maybe the shoulder, which could still be factoring in some way, and get him to the level that they want him to be at? David, what are your thoughts on Ian Hamilton? I know you've been looking into him a little bit. What is your confidence level that the Twins can get him where he needs to be?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Ian Hamilton has only thrown 200 Major League Baseball pitches. Like you mentioned, he's been dealt some of the toughest cards out there when it comes to injuries. You can't wish that upon anybody. And the fact that, again, similar to Anderson, he fits the Twins mold. He's a flamethrower. Throws his fastball fairly often, as well as that slider. But he's somebody, especially against righties. Hamilton, when he's faced righties, they've only batted 160. Now, obviously, that's a very small sample size. But he's someone, again, like Anderson, who is young and in his short time in the league has done, I would say, better than Anderson. But, he's somebody that I don't know if you would necessarily put in high pressure situations right away. But if things go well in those lower pressure situations, he's definitely, I think, somebody that could be a key component to this Twins bullpen.
I'm with you. So 2 fairly similar players brought in here coming onto the 40-man roster. Michael says, Nick, good rendition of Hamilton. Why, thank you. Thank you, Michael. You're my favorite commenter so far. Seth was less kind. He says, thoughts on Nick's Anderson and Hamilton rendition. Burr. I think that means it was bad. I'm sure it's an Aaron Burr reference too. And JD, our guy JD from Twins Daily, says that Doogie tweeted that Hamilton had his new teeth put in today. Oh, poor guy. Well, at least he's got him in there, so that's good. John, your thoughts on Ian Hamilton as an addition for the Twins, and sort of how do you compare him to Sean Anderson? Are you more excited about one or the other?
Well, I think Ian Hamilton is considered probably the higher upside play, but he's also probably the less consistent play, right? So I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily favor one over the other, at least in terms of who's going to make it to the bullpen this year. I do have faith in Wes Johnson, given the success they have done creating a bullpen seemingly out of thin air in 2019, right? And then leveraging talented but fairly unknown bullpen to the teeth in 2020. So I don't know. I think we'll know when we know whether or not he is there. I would certainly he's somebody worth rooting for, given the ball to the face that he took and such. But we'll have to see what his situation is. I'm just trying to figure out whether or not he has any options left. I think he does. I think he's got at least 1 or 2 options left. So it isn't necessarily the case that they want him to pull it all together this year. But in addition to that, in addition to the injury that we kind of talked about with the face, there was also a shoulder injury from that car accident. And he's never quite had the velocity that he had before that. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that can eventually bounce back. I mean, we should just point out he's been on. This is his 4th team in I think a year, right?
Yeah.
He was dropped I think in September, and then and it wasn't like I said, I think he has options. It was whether or not teams wanted to keep a spot on the 40-man roster for him. So. 3 teams have already given up on him in that regard, and whether or not it's going to be up to Hamilton and Wes Johnson to figure out whether or not he can bounce back from the adversity that he's faced so far, and develop some of those. Maybe use the slider enough to last long enough to allow that shoulder to get back to the velocity he had before.
Indeed. So, as and I'm not entirely positive about his options situation. If anyone watching this, or David, if you know for sure, let us know. But I do believe, I think John's correct that he does have options. And I think that is part of the appeal to him, which is another thing I want to touch on as we get into the conversation about sort of projecting the bullpen and sorting it and ranking it. Coming back here to this roster outlook, the guys we sort of have penned in, the 6 guys that I consider to be basically locks for the bullpen: Taylor Rogers, Alex Colome, Tyler Duffy, Hansel Robles, who the Twins signed, former Angels closer this offseason, Caleb Thielbar, and Jorge Alcala, who was very impressive as a rookie last year. Now, what's missing there is a long reliever, first of all, and one could make the argument that that's not necessarily that critical or essential of a thing to have, especially in an 8-man bullpen. But my understanding and belief is that the Twins are going to be aiming to take it very easy on their starters early in the year. We're coming off a strange season, a short season, so these guys are not maybe conditioned as well as they normally would be. You have guys like Happ, who often throws five inning outings. Dobnak has some things to prove if he's going to be that 5th starter. Pineda has not really shown the ability to go deep on a consistent basis. So I think at least one of those final roles is going to have to be reserved for someone who can pitch multiple innings on a semi-regular basis. I don't think any of the guys we have in there right now are conditioned to do that, especially coming off a short season. And we'll talk about some guys who might be able to do that, but even among some of the straight relief candidates, Brandon Waddell was a starter somewhat recently, but most of these guys are very accustomed to throwing 1 inning at a time. So I think that's sort of a need we're going to have to keep in mind when we look at these last 2 spots. And also, we talked about the value of having options. I think the Twins are absolutely going to use one of those spots as a rotating door. We've seen them do this in the past, and it's going to be all the more crucial. It gives you the ability basically to have more than an 8-man bullpen when you can say, all right, we're going to have this guy, we're going to throw him, send him across the river to St. Paul, which is now easier than ever, bring in a fresh arm, and kind of have a rotation so you can keep a fresh arm in there. So I think that's another key thing to keep in mind is the options situation. And that's another reason I find it maybe a little hard to believe they're going to go give out a guaranteed contract to someone like Tyler Clippard, who they won't have that option with. So what I'm going to do now here is remove that share screen and pull up a different one. We're going to pull up a little bullpen chart here, and we'll try to figure out not only who's going to be in the bullpen, but maybe kind of what the pecking order is going to be, which I think is sort of an interesting thing to think about in terms of like what Rocco Baldelli's strategy is going to be here. So as you can see here, we've got the 8 bullpen spots on the left. And over on the right, you've got sort of, I think, the whole body of candidates on the 40-man roster. Now, obviously, Brandon Waddell is out of that picture. So, not necessarily. I mean, he could very well stay in the organization if he passes through waivers. But I think coming off the 40-man roster basically takes him out of the picture for the opening day bullpen. So the guys we've got listed here, of course, are the 6 we just mentioned: Cody Stashak, Ian Jabot, who was claimed off waivers early in the offseason back in November alongside Waddell, Sean Anderson and Ian Hamilton, who we just mentioned, Edouard Colina, who came up and made one appearance last year, one of their best relief prospects, Dakota Chalmers, who's another prospect that was added to the 40-man roster this offseason, and then Randy Dobnak, who would be in this mix if he's not in the rotation, which he currently is penciled into, and Devin Smelter and Lewis Thorpe, who are also in that long reliever mix, which, as I mentioned, I think is a role they're going to want to have. But let's start at the top, which I think this is kind of an interesting question to tackle. Is we know pretty well that the Twins are not just going to have a designated closer. That's just not really how Rocco Baldelli rolls. He's not going to just have a ninth inning pigeonholed guy. He's going to use guys in situations that suit them. But I still think there's a hierarchy and there's a number one preferred option. And I'm not entirely sure who that would be. There's an argument that could be made for Rogers, who, of course, has been their top reliever for years and was their closer, coming off a bit of a tough year. Alex Colome, newly signed, former closer of the White Sox, certainly has a resume that would put him at the top of that list. Tyler Duffy, I think, has outpitched everyone else on this list over the last 2 years. How likely is he to sustain that? And, you could make a case, I guess, for Hansel Robles if he pitches like he did in 2019. But the interesting thing is that all four of those guys have some closing experience, especially Robles, Colome, and Rogers. Those guys were all full-time closers in 2019, which gives you some comfort and confidence in the ninth inning. David, if you try to sort of differentiate between these guys, and obviously it's all very situational and everything, but who would sort of be number one in the pecking order at a high level as you look at those names?
Well, I think if you take the approach that the Twins organization has seen Taylor Rogers succeed in the closer role, not necessarily this past year, but in 2019, I suppose you could go that route. But also, Alex Colome has been extremely good. He also clearly has one of the better cutters in the league, if not one of the best at this time. And at this point, I would not be surprised to see a platoon in that role. Maybe later on in the season, mid-season, they go with more of a consistent role there. But I would say if the Twins are in a save situation in Game 1 against, I believe they released the times today in Milwaukee. Is it in Milwaukee, I want to say? Then I would say, you know what? I would say Taylor Rogers right now. And by no means is that a 100% confident answer. But because the organization has seen him succeed in that role.
Let's also not forget that Taylor Rogers and Baldelli has some experience with Colome too. They were both with the Rays at the same time, and so he might have a level of comfort with Colome that he wouldn't necessarily have with any other free agent. I tend to agree with you, David. I think Rogers is still viewed as the most reliable person in that bullpen, in that role, but he wasn't by the end of last year. Sergio Romo was, and they didn't even bring him back. So, I think it'll be something that sort of shakes out. I think the default answer is Rogers until proven differently, but I think it could certainly be that Colome ends up playing a significant role, and maybe even the lead role by the time we get into the meat of the season.
So we're all in agreement. I think I'm with you guys. We're all in agreement that opening day, Kenta Maeda pitches 8 innings, and the Twins have a 1-run lead. Taylor Rogers is the guy who's coming in to pitch the 9th?
As of now, yep.
All right. We're slotting him in to the number one spot.
Except there's no way they only have a 1-run lead going into the 9th with Kenta Maeda on the mound. Come on. That lineup, come on.
Taylor Rogers gets the number one spot. If you guys are watching, commenters, we'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these picks, and we'll let that influence our list as well, especially if there's any disagreement on any of these spots in the hierarchy. So the number 2 in the pecking order, now we come down to Colome and Duffy, and I think they both have an argument in their favor. Obviously, Colome has the track record. He's been very consistently a shutdown closer in the majors, which makes him very appealing as an 8th inning setup man. But Tyler Duffy has pitched better than Colome. He's pitched better than anyone over the past couple seasons or season and a half, however you want to look at it. And certainly a much more dominant pitcher in terms of strikeouts and missing bats. John, who do you sort of slot? Obviously there's different strengths for each, but which one of those guys would you slot above the other?
Well, I mean, you would do the same. You could have said the same thing about Tyler Duffy last year in the entire Twins bullpen, right? I mean, I guess it's probably worth delving into this with Rocco at some point, but I think he likes having Duffy as the fireman. I think he likes him to come in and put out a fire. Duffy has shown the ability to do that. He's shown the ability, and that might be trickier than you think because you got to be able to get ready in a hurry. You've got to be able to jump right in so that when there's before the situation gets bad, you're not you're coming in with runners on the corners and one out and getting out of the jam. So I mean, I think you could argue that Tyler Duffy was their best reliever overall last year, but that still was the role he had. He didn't have a high lever. He didn't have a lot of high leverage innings, not a lot of 8th or 9th inning appearances. He was almost always coming in the 6th, but almost always with runners on, and get him out of a jam. And I mean, I might argue that in fact that is his role again this year. Now I don't know if that means that you want to put him number 2 in the bullpen still, but I don't know why one could argue the reason they went and got Colome is so they don't have to put Duffy at the back end of that bullpen to do that with Rogers. So they had the luxury of pulling in Tyler Duffy in the 5th or 6th inning. Does that put him at 3rd or 4th in the hierarchy or 5th or 6th in the hierarchy? I don't know.
And well, the way I'm thinking about this is not necessarily just strictly, okay, Rogers pitches the 9th, number 2 guy pitches the 8th, number 3 guy pitches the 7th. I'm really thinking in terms of leverage. I mean, who do you want in the biggest spots? So for me, it's strictly a matter of who's the better reliever, and it's pretty close, right?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. David, help us break this tie, because I think we're having a hard time differentiating. I mean, they both have a good case. Who are you going to in a big spot if you have them both available, Colome or Duffy?
Yeah, well, I say, a wise man once said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that going with that philosophy, you keep Duffy in the role that he has been in. And, as of right now, yes, he has pitched with runners at the corners, runners in scoring position, and gotten out of some innings. But late in the game, whether that, as a setup man in the 8th, at this point in time, that's a role that Colome has, not only has he been a closer, but he's been a setup man a little bit as well during his time in the major leagues. So I would put him in there inning-wise as the setup man right before Rogers. But at the same time, overall, as if you were to leverage quality of bullpen pitcher and the value that they bring to that bullpen, I would put Duffy ahead of him there.
Hey, Nick, I just took a look at you just mentioned sort of the leverage, right? I just took a look at the leverage index, the game leverage index in last year's bullpen. Because I was wondering, okay, was Duffy put into bigger spots trying to get the Twins out of a jam than Rogers or Romo trying to protect a late lead? Which is a more valuable role, sort of? First thing you notice is that using win probability added, Duffy had the highest win probability added in the bullpen last year. He was the one who helped the most. But even in terms of the positions in which he was placed in, the game leverage index on those 3 players is 1.69 for Rogers, 1.62 for Romo, and 1.61 for Duffy. They were all being used at sort of the very different parts of the game, but very similar in terms of their leverage index for the game.
Good point. A good little insight there. Yeah, I think my thought is that let's say you got 2 innings left to go. You got Duffy and Colome both available. I think if you're in the 8th inning and you've got the heart of the opposing lineup on deck, they're going to go to Duffy, and then they'll use Colome to pitch the 9th and take care of the rest of it. But to me, that makes Duffy the higher leverage reliever and the preferred option. So until further notice, I'm going with Duffy behind Rogers in that number 2 spot, which of course makes Colome the default number 3rd, because I don't think anyone else in this bullpen is particularly close to that trio right now. One thing that's interesting about these 3 pitchers that are sort of the late inning dragon for Rocco Baldelli is that Taylor Rogers obviously is a left-handed pitcher, very good against lefties. Tyler Duffy and Alex Colome both have reverse splits in their career. They've both been better against left-handed batters than right-handed batters, which is not necessarily ideal in this division and on this team because there really aren't that many big left-handed bats, and there's a ton of right-handed bats. So that's kind of something to keep in mind, especially as we look at maybe the bottom spots and try to figure out who might fill those. I think that's kind of one thing that's missing is a real right-handed specialist, which Romo was with that great slider, which Trevor May was. That seems to be the thing that they haven't quite backfilled yet. Colome, the one thing that makes me a little nervous about him while we're talking about him, and makes me a little nervous, and I don't know about nervous, but it is a reservation I think worth having about the Twins offseason is that, hey, they got a lot of good deals on these free agents. They haven't given anyone a multi-year deal, so they've kept that flexibility. And it's not just because they're like great negotiators or they're like persuading these guys to sign for less than they want. Alex Colome got a lot less than comparable relievers on this market. We saw Trevor May get a 2-year deal. We saw Blake Treinen get a 2-year deal. We saw the White Sox team that has had Alex Colome pitching as well as humanly possible in the closer role, a 91% save percentage over the last 2 years and a 2.27 ERA. They probably could have brought Colome back on a similar deal that the Twins got him on, but instead they went and spent 10 times as much on Liam Hendricks. Does that give you any kind of pause, John? Look, the White Sox are known for making dumb moves from time to time, but there's something there that they and maybe some other teams are seeing that whether it's the strikeout rate, whether it's the age, the peripherals not matching up, that's giving them a little bit of pause.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not a free agent if your team, can't live without you, right? The red flag, both for the White Sox and I think for the rest of the league, is the strikeout rate. That's it. When your strikeout rate dives into the mid-sixes, which is what it did. It's not just that he's been mid-sixes or 7 or something for his whole career. It dove into the mid-sixes. Now, it dove in the mid-sixes over a 60-game season. That's the sort. But the strikeout rate levels out pretty fast. It's not something that you don't have a 6 strikeout rate in the first half of the season and a 12 or an 11 strikeout rate in the second. It's not like batting average or something like that usually. So, that's the concern. The explanation for that is he throws the cutter. He doesn't need to strike a lot of people out. He just puts the ball in play. He gets ground balls. It makes it easy to turn double plays. That's not a bad thing for a closer to have. But, if you're looking for the, dominant guy who can come in with the bases loaded or face enough adversity such that he ends up with the bases loaded and no outs, Colome is probably not the ideal person. He's not going to be able to necessarily get, a strikeout on demand the way you need him to. Now, it could also be, that the Twins took a look at, their revamped infield and thought to themselves, we don't mind having a closer that allows us to put the ball in play because we think we're in pretty good defensively. So let's roll with Colome.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the guy that Colome is functionally replacing in this bullpen is Trevor May, and he was that guy. I mean, we need a strikeout. We got guys on base. We don't want the ball in play. Trevor May was one of the best relievers in baseball for that kind of situation, and Colome is not that. He'll get you weak contact, but as John said, they really did improve their infield defense, and the Twins might have the best defensive team in the league. So, bit of a lesson to concern there.
And he is an interesting replacement, right? Because he's almost the exact opposite. Right. Trevor May was a guy who could look dominant and strike out a side, but he gave up too many damn home runs, whereas Colome is somebody who never really looks dominant. All the balls are in play, but the ball stays in the park.
That's true. That is 0 home runs compared to what did May give up 5 home runs in 20 innings last year?
Yep.
Something like that.
Eric says, I think a small part comes to the guy they just paid for. Second man up to me is Colome. Could very well be the case. That's a guy who expects to get his big leverage spots. And, Tyler Duffy is not as established and hasn't been doing it for as long. David, how much do you think track record comes into play? And do you really think it comes down to kind of like John said? I mean, the situation, if you need a strikeout, you're going to Duffy. And if you want an experienced guy who's going to come in and get some weak contact and maybe be a little more stable and reliable, it's going to be Colome. Does that sound plausible to you?
In a sense it does. I think that it's all about a shift of mindset for Twins fans in the sense that, like John said, Colome is not Trevor May. He's a 180 from Trevor May, which isn't necessarily a bad thing when you've got Andrelton Simmons playing shortstop, you've got Josh Donaldson at third, and if the ball gets to the outfield, you've got Byron Buxton in center. But I think that when it comes down to it, experience matters. But at the same time, Duffy he's not a rookie in the league. And I think that places value. But at the same time, I think it's going to depend on who the Twins bullpen is facing, the situation. And I know that sounds like a vague answer, but it is, I think, going to be really situational in the sense that if they do need a strikeout, if there's runners on second and third, with one out and you need a strikeout, absolutely, maybe Duffy's the guy. But if you're looking, runners on first and second with one out, and you'd like a ground ball double play, then maybe Colome is your guy.
Well, and I'll give you another name of somebody that's probably fourth on this list, Alcala. I mean, there's somebody who can strike people out, and especially if that player up there is a right-handed batter, right? Because Alcala was very, very, very good versus right-handed batters last year, and not particularly good against left-handed batters. And as a result, maybe that's who you're leveraging in that role if that's the situation you kind of run into.
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up because, like we talked about the reverse splits, we talked about how none of these top three guys specialize in getting right-handed batters out. Certainly, Jorge Alcala is the guy who specializes against righties. So let's talk a little bit about that fourth spot, and let's start with you, John. It sounds like I consider the guys that are vying for sort of fourth in the pecking order here to be Alcala, Thielbar, and Robles. Do you feel like Alcala is sort of head and shoulders ahead of the other two in that conversation?
Well, we're gonna have to see how Robles is, right?
Right.
I think probably I think one could suggest that Robles is probably the person they expect to take over that fourth spot, right? But I wouldn't rule out Alcala. We saw Alcala used in some high leverage innings last year, and that was encouraging to see. He was, like I said, he was absolutely dominant against right-handers last year. I think they've had a 420 OPS against Alcala last year. Right-handers did. He just got beat up by left-handers. He walked more. He still struck them out, but he also walked a lot of them, and he also walked enough of them, and gave up some big hits to them. So that's his danger. But he's somebody who pitched a couple times in the ninth inning last year, 3 times in the eighth inning, a couple times in extra innings. I think they've got some faith in him taking that spot. If I had to pick right now, I'd probably pick Alcala just because I think right now I have more faith in Alcala. But that might be a little bit silly with Robles' track record and experience. And if he's if he was healthy enough for them to sign him, he's probably got the inside track on that spot.
I think I'm with you. It's a tough, one guy pitched extremely well in the short 2020 season as a rookie. Hansel Robles was awful. He made 18 appearances. He had a 10.26 ERA for the Angels. But the prior year, I mean, if you can get him back healthy into that level, he was a very good closer in the major leagues, which is something that no one else remaining on this list can say anything close to. David, between Robles and Alcala, or maybe if Thielbar enters the conversation for you, who are you slotting into that fourth spot in our pecking order here?
Well, I have to agree with John that my gut says Alcala, but you can't deny the fact that Robles had a great 2019. It was the most appearances he's had in his major league career, 71 appearances, 2.48 ERA, rock solid. And I think that one thing that could be taken into account is a sense that, like you mentioned earlier, Nick, Robles has that experience in high-pressure situations. Obviously, just as any other sport is, baseball's a mental game. Clearly we are not going to see him in that quote-unquote closer role as much as you would see Rogers or Colome. But he's proven that he can perform in high-pressure situations. And clearly, if there's a situation that's less pressure in the 6th, 7th inning, that could be something that could work to his advantage there. But, obviously not a good 2020 season for him. Alcala had an excellent rookie year. But as far as that goes, I would probably say Robles.
The hope for the Twins on Robles is that the 60-game season really hurt him, right? Because there was no reports of an injury or anything like that. It was just his velocity is not quite down at fine. It started to climb up again, sort of as the season went on. Which maybe puts him in like sort of the Joe Nathan camp. Joe Nathan would always show up at spring training where it would be like, oh no, Joe Nathan's velocity is down, and Joe Nathan would be like, yeah, I'm going to be back up there. Don't worry, give it a little time, But when you've got a compressed spring training, right, and you've got then a compressed season on top of that, if it takes you 8 weeks to get your velocity back up to about where you want it to be, well, you're already halfway through this season and you've lost your closer job with the Angels. Like, that's the way that was going to work last year. So the question is whether or not some of the struggles he had last year were just him regressing back to his he was always been held back a little bit by walking people, right? Was what we saw him, kind of regressing back to the mean, or was it, a condensed season, or was it an injury that he wasn't talking about, or is it something else entirely? We'll find out.
Very good point. Seth says Robles to start the year, and the hope that by midseason Alcala's about 2 or 3 on this list. I think that's about exactly right. So, as good as Alcala has shown the ability to be, he's only he only threw 24 innings last year. He doesn't have enough of a track record. And frankly, even in the minors, he wasn't really living up to his potential for the first year or two after the Twins acquired him from Houston. He really and granted, they were still trying to use him as a starter, so that's a factor. But I just think we need to see Alcala do it for a little bit longer before we can put him in that group with these veterans at the top here. So we're going to go Robles number 4 for now. We're going to go Alcala number 5. For the number 6 spot, I think the only guy that makes sense to put here is Caleb Thielbar. He's the only other guy on this list who has a guaranteed contract, so I feel like he's a lock in that sense to be their second left-hander behind Taylor Rogers. David, do you agree with that? Thielbar is going to be on this team, right?
I do, absolutely. He may not have the fastest velocity, but at the end of the day, you'll hear Major League baseball players say it isn't always necessarily about velocity. It's about the diversity as far as velocity between your pitches. And he's got that slow lefty curveball. And obviously he had that just a successful season this past year. I had the chance to write a feature story on him earlier this year, and he's one of those guys that you can't help but cheer for. So I definitely lock him in at that 6 hole.
Yeah, it's a great story. John, do you agree? And how much of a believer are you in what we saw in the short season, the comeback? He took a few years out of baseball, came back, and the Twins were able to really unlock something new. And like David said, an incredible curveball. He was just blowing people away. How confident are you that he can repeat something close to that this year?
Well, he's the default choice for sure for number 6. There's no question about that. Walk rate was a little high. Strikeout rate was outstanding. There's a lot to like there. There's certainly a lot to like there in terms of left-handed options on the Twins 40-man roster, right? We just lost Waddell. Maybe we lost Waddell. I don't know. Maybe he'll still stay in the organization, but they just took him off of the 40-man roster. So they must have some level of faith that one of the 3 left-handers they sort of still can pull out of the bullpen is going to be able to, adequately handle that role. Because I don't think they want to be forced to put Taylor Rogers in sort of the left-handed reliever type role. And frankly, he's like you said, the splits are not so great. He's been fairly even on both sides. He's not a lefty killer by any stretch. Actually, he probably is a lefty killer, but he's also a righty killer. So why screw with him? I guess I'm optimistic that he will maintain it again for another year or two. I'd love to see the guy have a career. He's a good fit for that, and if the Twins end up sticking with that, that's a good fit for them. If he kind of implodes, then they've got to give some thoughts to what they're going to do for left-handed relief help, because frankly they must have a fair amount of faith in him, because I think they're kind of putting a lot on his shoulders, to be honest.
Yeah, as you look here at the rest of the options, not much. Devin Smeltzer and Lewis Thorpe, the only lefties we have in that mix now that Waddell has been DFA'd. And those are both kind of long relief candidates. So yeah, I mean, you said it. Taylor Rogers is really the only super established lefty dispatcher in that bullpen. But as we also mentioned, some of these righties have proven to be quite good against left-handed pitching. Seth says Albers maybe for the Caleb Thielbar lefty role. And that's kind of a funny story. Of course, Andrew Albers, the former Twin, was brought back in on a minor league deal in recent days. And it's hard not to dream on a similar scenario playing out as we saw with Thielbar, a former Twins pitcher, left-hander, who was gone and out of sight for a while, coming back, and maybe the Twins can figure out some way to unlock what we saw right when Andrew Albers first came up back in, what was that, 2014, 13? That was a long time ago.
Right.
So now we've got those 6 locks that we've talked about. I think that hierarchy we've got there seems pretty reasonable. This is where the decisions get a little tougher. And I don't know how much these last 2 spots are going to be final because, as we discussed, the Twins like to rotate guys through those spots. And I think most of the pitchers that we're going to be talking about here have options remaining, with one notable exception. A few people in the comments have complained about the fact that Cody Stashak was not considered a lock. Or I don't know if they complained, but just made note of it. And Stashak has pitched tremendously well in the majors. Great strikeout to walk ratio. My thing is he has options, so it's pretty easy to send him down to AAA to start the season. He's only thrown 40 innings in the majors. He doesn't have a real big, long track record and was sidelined for a while last year. So even in the shortened season, we didn't get to see him for the full year. And he also, like Duffy and like Colome and like Robles, I believe, has reverse splits. He's better against left-handed, at least in this small sample, better against left-handed batters than right-handed batters. So he doesn't solve that need we talked about a guy who is, gonna help them against some of those tough righties. Seth says Stashak is a lock unless it's business reasoning. We'll see. I mean, do you agree with that, David? Do you think that Stashak is essentially a lock coming into spring training?
I would say as of now, not necessarily 100% lock, but as close as you can be to a lock. I think that he's familiar with the organization, obviously familiar with Wes Johnson and with the pitching staff. And, he's someone who isn't necessarily going to solve the problems that you were just mentioned. But he is someone who has, he hasn't been a star by any means, but he's been rock solid. And I think, as of right now, that 8 role is definitely I think that's going to be the revolving door, but I think for now we can put Stashak at 7.
Yeah, it seems Colton agrees. He says, I may be crazy, but I feel strongly about Stashak at 7. You are not crazy and not alone, I don't think. That seems to be sort of the general sentiment. John, are you in the same boat?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I think of those first 7 names, I'd also put Stashak at 7. I also think it's pretty safe that he's going to be there. And frankly, I'm a big Stashak fan. I just am. But somebody from that top 7 isn't going to be on the roster on opening day, right? Somebody's going to be hurt, or something's going to go wrong. Or I would have had Zach Littell in those top 7 at this point last year, right? By the way, he was on the opening day roster, so that's fine. But that didn't do him any good. So yeah, I would say let's put Stashak in there, number 7. Let's try and figure out which of the long reliefers the failed fifth starters are going to end up taking that 8th spot.
All right, we got Stashak in at number 7, so we've got one final spot to try to figure out. Now, John, let's start with you because you mentioned you think it's going to be one of the failed starters, one of the long relief types. Seems you agree that because everyone we've got in this picture so far is a 1-inning pitcher. These are not pitchers that are accustomed to throwing multiple innings. Certainly, they can on any given day, but I think the Twins are going to want to have some length in this bullpen. The thing to note here is that Lewis Thorpe, as I mentioned, I alluded earlier. I believe is the only pitcher on this list that is out of options. And Thorpe is kind of an interesting case because he was a good prospect, out of Australia, came up, big strikeout rates, big K to walk, missed some time with injuries and sickness. And looked pretty good when he pitched in 2019, showed some promise, I think. Really rough year last year. Seemed like he had some friction with the team. He was sent out of spring training, the original spring training, very early. Wasn't too happy about it, I don't think. Understandably, a lot of people are down on Lewis Thorpe, and I would imagine that the Twins front office, to some extent, is down on him. Do you think? I mean, I think Seth said earlier. He kind of gave his layout. He said Colome, Rogers, Duffy, Robles, Alcala, Thielbar, Stashak, Thorpe. He thinks Thorpe will be that last guy. John, do you think Thorpe has the inside track because of this situation? Do you think the Twins, given their relationship with him and the way he's pitched recently, they're not going to factor that too heavily, or where do you sort of stand on that 8th spot?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how things play out in spring training, but right now, because God knows they did not go well in spring training last year. But I would give him if I had to pick somebody from that list, if I had to put my money on a player, I'd be putting it on Lewis Thorpe. You mentioned the out of options thing. That's one thing. The second thing is that if they were disenfranchised with Lewis Thorpe, they've had plenty of opportunities, including within the last 24 hours, to get him off of the 40-man roster. Third is that they probably like another left-handed pitcher in that bullpen. And, and fourth is I just don't think he's going to win the 5th starter job. So, between you add all those up and you come up with, he's a pretty good person to be that last person in the bullpen. And, and then we'll see what happens. He's always had the stuff. It might very well be in that relief role that his stuff even plays up better than it can. He has seen time with the Twins as a reliever and hasn't gone particularly well, but that's the sort of everyday job that you can kind of get into a habit of performing well, and suddenly you just get a little bit of success and it just continues to roll for you. So let's I've got no problem with them putting him in that role, and again, he would seem like a perfect fit that way, between contract position, left-handed pitcher, stuff-wise, etc.
Yeah, he is. That is kind of maybe a good spot for him to be in, because of course long man is not generally a high leverage spot. You're probably pitching, early in a game after a starter didn't go long. You might have a big lead or a big deficit. But, teams do want someone that they can at least count on to get some outs and bridge the gap to the bullpen, which I don't know if the Twins trust Lewis Thorpe. I mean, he came in at times and just couldn't get anyone out or throw strikes last year. So it's a little tricky, and I'm sure a lot of it's going to depend on how he looks in spring training.
But how much do you ever trust the 8th guy in your bullpen, honestly? You know what I mean? Like that's probably, that might be another thing that sort of works in his favor. Like that is where you stash the guy that, well, we're not really sure about him, but he's got some upside, which is the one thing Thorpe has always had, right? I would suggest that's why he's still on the roster.
Right. No, they have the benefit, though, of having guys in Smeltzer and Dobnak who are pretty established and would be, pretty reliable, dependable, long relievers. David, what's your view on that last spot? Do you give Thorpe an inside track with his situation, or do you even think maybe one of these waiver guys and a not a long reliever could take it?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with John that Thorpe has an upside. He's had an upside since he's been a prospect. It's just a matter of when is he going to get there? I don't think he's gotten there the last 2 years. So I would not be shocked if they keep him there or if they have him there at that 8th spot. But at the same time, when it comes to these waiver guys, I would not necessarily sleep on Ian Hamilton. Potentially a long shot, but somebody who has never really gotten a chance, a long chance. Like I said earlier, he's thrown 200 pitches in Major League Baseball, and he's someone that in those 200 pitches has done decently well. At the same time, I'm seeing in the comments, the option of signing a 5th starter and putting Dobnak there. That would be pretty awesome. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think that, yes, it would be nice to have another lefty in that role because, at this time, the only lefties really that you have in the bullpen that are a lock are Rogers and Thielbar. But at the same time, Ian Hamilton has good stuff. He fits the Twins mold. He's young, and he's somebody that also I think has, his ceiling may not be as high as Thorpe's or as Sean Anderson's, but he is somebody who has proven in his very, very small sample size that he can do all right.
Yeah, and as we mentioned earlier, the opportunity to use that last spot or a couple of those last spots in sort of a revolving door role, because it's just very easy if you have guys with options to have a guy pitch a couple innings, send him to AAA, bring in a fresh arm. And the Twins have shown that they are willing and adept at doing that. So it's not necessarily a total lock that they're going to bring in a long reliever. But I just think with the situation coming into this year, and especially if they don't add any more starters to get a little more reliability in the rotation, they're going to be going out of their way to protect starters, give them shorter outings. I know Jay Happ, I think, is one of those guys, kind of like Jake Odorizzi, where it's like you don't want to really put him through a third time through the order. So I think that it's going to be a long guy. I think, honestly, I do expect – I see that Matthew said here, sign a fifth starter and have Dobnak as your long reliever. Said he's done with Thorpe. Can't blame him. I do think that the Twins will bring in another starter of some sort, even if it's just a guy in a minor league deal with a good chance to win that fifth spot. And I think Dobnak will fill that role. But situation being what it is, currently Dobnak is lined up as a starter, so we're not going to pencil him in. I think we're going to go with Thorpe in that spot just because as long as the Twins have him on the roster, I don't see why they would want to risk losing him. He's still quite young, still has the upside. They still seem to have some belief in him, even if they're a little frustrated and disenchanted over what's happened. But I think what's going to be interesting to keep an eye on, the Twins still have a spot to clear on their 40-man roster when they make the signing of Alex Colome official. They're at 40 right now. So will Lewis Thorpe be the guy that they pull from the 40-man roster? If he is, then that is what it is. If he's not, then I got to think they think there's a pretty good chance he's going to make the team, because if they waive him in spring training, he's going to get claimed by another team. That is a guarantee. He's not going through waivers. So I don't know why they would risk losing a player who might have more value to them when they have a good, strong feeling that Thorpe's going to get cut and be lost when they get into spring training. So I think that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. But there we've got Thorpe. So here we have a pretty solid, I think a reasonable outlook here for the Twins opening day bullpen. David, how does that unit hit you? I mean, do you think that's a good bullpen? Do you think it's a big step back from last year? What's your confidence level if those are the guys on opening day?
Well, I definitely think that the addition of Colome puts the bullpen at a place where they're similar to last year. Obviously, like we talked about earlier, he's not Trevor May, for better or worse. A very different pitcher. So I don't know how much gain there is compared to last year's bullpen. But at the same time, when you look at the AL Central, obviously the White Sox spent a boatload of money on Liam Hendricks. And Cleveland is essentially, when it comes to their pitching staff, obviously they've got Shane Bieber and some other guys in the starting rotation that are solid. But I think this is a bullpen that can certainly put them in a good position to win the AL Central. Now, when it gets past then, not sure. But at the same time, I feel really confident in the top three guys in the bullpen. And I also feel confident with Thielbar serving a role similar to what he did last year. I would say those are probably the four guys that I have the most confidence in. Right after that, I'd probably put Alcala, to be honest, confident in the sense that he is someone who's young, untapped potential. But with everybody else, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, there's definitely some uncertainty after those top three names. I see Matthew says, so many question marks for me after number 3 on this list. Would really love to sign one more free agent to raise the floor, as John likes to say. John, do you like to say that right now? Do you feel the Twins still need to raise the floor, or are you feeling relatively confident with this group?
I mean, I've felt confident even before they made some of these moves. I just trust this organization and this management team and this pitching staff right now with developing a bullpen. Maybe that's an overreaction given the fact that I was the one banging the drum on how terrible the bullpen was in 2018 and 2019 and kind of talking about how much help it needed. And they got through 2019 and I started to see what Wes Johnson could do with a bullpen. And I was like, okay. Every time they make a move like picking up Sean Anderson or picking up Ian Hamilton, I'm now at the point where I'm like, well, maybe. I mean, that could be our number 4 guy by the time this season is over. And I also don't want to rule out Edward Kalina. I think he's, we talked about where Alcala could end up on this list. I mean, Kalina could end up fairly high on this list as well. He's got a high upside high upside play in a lot of ways on this. And the entire offseason, I sort of felt like the bullpen I was okay with addressing the bullpen. I could see the argument given how many arms that we lost. But ultimately, I just trust this staff to develop bullpen arms. And then once they develop them, no matter how good they are or not, like you take a look at last year's bullpen, there isn't anybody on that list, maybe the possible exception of Duffy, who other teams went, well, that guy's absolutely dominant. You know what I mean? They didn't have that anchor that you are so often associated with. And now Trevor May seemed to have that potential and got paid based on that potential, right? But ultimately, what you saw was a really, really a bullpen that was very good, but leveraged enough to have a great impact in games, and that goes to Baldelli. Yeah, that's Baldelli's strength. You've got between those two factors, one is Wes Johnson turning, to some extent scrap heapish type guys into impact players, and then Baldelli turning those impact players into meaningful differences in a ball game. I just have trouble getting worked up about the bullpen anymore. I feel like that one way or the other they're going to handle it, and I feel like they've got enough depth and can call up enough guys to kind of fill in the blanks a lot of the time. Now, one of these times I'm going to be wrong. They're going to run out. They're going to get overworked. We don't have a 28-man roster this year, so we can just keep throwing arms at people. But right now, no, I don't have any concerns about this bullpen right now.
Well said. And I think, until further notice, we got to have some faith because, they've shown the ability to make it work in the bullpen. But if things go south and if the Twins are blowing a bunch of leads early in the season and some of these gambles, Robles doesn't bounce back, Tyler Duffy comes back to earth a little, Colome shows why some of these teams weren't necessarily interested in giving a multi-year deal, they're going to be open to criticism. They let some good relievers walk: Sergio Romo, Tyler Clippard, Matt Whistler, Trevor May, and to replace them with a lot of waiver guys and, cheapish one-year signings it's a bold bet with the team where the stakes are pretty high. Couple of moves to announce that have been shared by people in our comments. Sounds like the Detroit Tigers have signed outfielder Nomar Mazara to a 1-year, $1.7 million contract, according to Colton. Thank you for sharing that. And also, it sounds like, according to Michael, the Red Sox are going to sign our old friend Marwin Gonzalez. So, hey, good luck with that. Good luck with that, Red Sox. John, you got something to say about Marwin to the Sox?
I'll say this. I think people are probably a little more down on Marwin than I am. Listen, I don't think he's ever going to recreate the year that got him paid, right? But it'll be, he is only 31 years old. It'll be interesting to see if he can have a couple of extra years here towards the back end of a bench. He's always been known as a good teammate and good clubhouse guy. So, best to Marwin Gonzalez. I hope it works out well for him. I hope he's not as done as he looked in that 60-game sample last year. I suspect he is not as done as he looked in that 60-game sample. So
I hope not for his sake and the Red Sox sake, because he looked cooked. All right, to close it out, I have one more question for you both. Looking at the right side of the screen here, the guys who did not quite make our cut for opening day, and maybe even beyond that, you can incorporate anyone else in the system you want. Which reliever in the Twins mix are you most excited about to possibly join this mix and maybe rise high on the list, maybe joining some of those top leverage guys? David, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, I think, if you mention excitement, I think Edouard Colome. Yes, he had a very, very, very rocky MLB debut in 2020. But then again, you can't judge a guy off of one appearance. He's someone that's young. He's talented. As John mentioned earlier, he's got a big upside. And I think he's somebody that obviously he's got velocity as well. And that's something that we're seeing in this Twins bullpen that essentially hasn't been as prominent in the past. You've got guys like Alcala who can throw very hard. You've got other guys on that list on the right, like Ian Hamilton, Sean Anderson, who also have some velocity. So I think that as far as potential, Edouard Colome is somebody that I would love to, not dive headfirst in, but to get his feet wet this year. And I think that could really set him for a successful path forward.
Yeah, Colleen is a great pick, a guy that a lot of people in the Twins system have really liked. Big velocity, and yeah, a rough debut, but I mean, Trevor May had an unimaginably bad MLB debut, and he turned into a perfectly fine reliever, so don't put too much stock into that. Levi asks, is there a taxi squad this year? Not really, although the AAA team is basically a taxi squad. I mean, they're next door and readily available. John, I know you mentioned Edouard Colome earlier, so he's a guy that you're obviously pretty excited about. Anyone else on this list or in the Twins system that kind of catches your eye as someone to watch?
I'm really looking forward to seeing what Randy Dobnak does this year. Is it a make or break year for Randy Dobnak? Kinda, maybe. I mean, especially if they end up not picking up that veteran fifth starter that I think we both kind of think they will probably mine out of the free agent list right now. But he ended up having a really good 2/3 of a year last year, which is still only 40 games, and then faded enough down the end that, at the point at that, midway through the year, we were wondering whether or not the fact that he wasn't really striking out guys a lot was really a problem. Was he just sort of was he trying to get them to put the ball in play, essentially, and then saving his strikeouts for when he sort of needed them? And more we were kind of coming around to that idea that maybe he was having that kind of success without the huge strikeout rate. Well, that's not something that you see very often. And then the last third of the year made us wonder if maybe we'd been projecting a little too much or being a little too dreamcasty, right? But a great story, certainly a good guy. And an interesting pitch mix and set. And I'll be interested to see whether or not he can carve out a long-term career, either as a starter or in the bullpen. But I'm kind of hoping as a starter.
Yeah, me too. And with all these great, with this great defensive infield and Randy Dobnak being one of the most extreme ground ball pitchers in baseball, pretty good situation for him. A good time to be in a make and break situation. So my beer is empty, so I think that means it's time for us to wrap up here. John, are the Winter Meltdown 2021 pint glasses still available? Can people still get those, or I think
they are still available? I would do a search on Winter Meltdown pint glasses. I'm guessing you can still find them. I'm sure you could. There's still a story up someplace at Twins Daily that points to them. We don't have any special URL for it or anything. Or you can. The
problem is we got so much content; it's just buried now. It's
actually, I really do want to thank everybody who bought those because it's I think we're going to end up with a nice check to hand off to some nonprofits for some hospitality industry workers so impacted by the pandemic. So we've got. Well over 300 sold at this point, so that's a good start for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, David. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and contributed your thoughts or just hung out with us. As I mentioned, pitchers and catchers report for the Twins a week from tomorrow. So barring some probably unexpected big move from the Twins here in the next week, I think the next time you'll be hearing from us on Offseason Live will probably be some sort of spring training preview show. So stay tuned for that. You can always find full episodes if you missed any of this or you want to catch past episodes of Offseason Live. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Just search Twins Daily YouTube or our podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast. It's free content. We release new episodes all the time. Seth does interviews with minor leaguers. And by the way, on twinsdaily.com right now, we are in the midst of our top 20 Twins Daily prospects countdown of 2021. So you want to tune in, and you're going to see a lot of names who are probably going to factor into the bullpen mix, if not this year, then in the future. So thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Thank you, David. Thank you, John. And everyone, please enjoy your Thursday night and the rest of your week. Go Twins.
Win Twins.